Hey guys, and welcome to another devlog video for the procedural city generator. So today I wanted to do something a little bit different than my normal devlogs. This is going to be a behind the scenes look, so to speak, at my attempts on creating the next big feature that I feel needs to be implemented in the city generator, which is sidewalks, or what I call the quote unquote islands, right? And this is the space, as you can see here on my map. I have a nice little city layout. This is the space in between the roads, right? So we have main roads and minor roads and side roads, and they're all intersecting based on some settings, but then you have all this empty space in between where the buildings are going to be, right? So obviously, this can't just be emptiness. This has to be something. Usually there's like a sidewalk, which means that you have like a little concrete island that's a little bit above the street with a certain material, and then the buildings will be on top of it, right? And that has been a question that I've had for a long time. How do I create sidewalks, right? That has been a pretty challenging problem that I need to solve, and I still haven't solved it, by the way. Um, but it's always been in the back of my mind as something that I have to figure out if I really want a city to look like a modern city, like a New York City, for example. Any big city you'll see obviously has the streets, has the sidewalks, has the parks, the buildings, etc. So, um, and the reason why this is so difficult is because there are many different ways that I can tackle this with their pros and cons. And this is kind of the difficulty of it all. Also, the fact that I'm doing things in Blueprint, not in C++, which means that I'm also limited to certain things. So I figured I'll show you guys some of the things I've been working on last week. Some of these I've discarded already, but I want you guys to kind of take a quick look at my thinking and maybe give me your opinion as to if you have any ideas of any other ways that I could do this. Then of course I am absolutely willing to listen to you. So when you look at streets here, the way I think about it is there are two main methods that I could do to create sidewalks. One is probably the most obvious one, which is have the sidewalk as part of the road mesh. And when you see a lot of the roads that are in the marketplace and a lot of the meshes, the roads come with the centerpiece here, but they also come with a little raised section here for the sidewalk. And I think that's great. That's probably the easiest way. I don't have to worry about curves or detecting the volume or anything. The roads just have the sidewalk included. And I do this with MRT. If you guys have used my tool, there's an option for you to create the sidewalks. But here's the problem with the sidewalks, or the challenge, right? Right now, the algorithms that I'm using to create this road network are by design very much freeform. I'm not controlling the angle at which the roads intersect here. I'm letting the algorithm do its thing, and wherever the roads intersect, I'm just stopping the road right here. So you can see here. But the problem is that if I were to use sidewalks on each road, this road would have sidewalks, and this road would have sidewalks, which means that when this road intercepts here, this section here of the road will have a sidewalk from this road. So it'll basically be blocked. So what I would have to do then is detect the location of intersection, and then instead of overlapping this road here, I would have to then kind of move the spline somewhere here, and then spawn a connection here, a connector mesh that would then connect this type of road with this type of road. In this case, it will be kind of like a T connection. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. But the problem with that is that then now I have to have a bunch of different connectors. I have to account for all kinds of different angles, and I can't have it freeform. So a T connector, I would be forced to then move the road to connect something like this, right? So it'll have to be parallel, and then you'll have a connector here, right? Something like this. I wouldn't be able to leave it freeform. So then you won't get the variety. For example, this type of connection is probably not going to be like that. It'll be more like this, right? And even then, this has challenges. But that would be the only way you see, and you can see. So there are a bunch of T connections that I would have to handle this. So right there, I'm already limiting myself to a pre-made set of connectors. So you won't have the same freedom generated in the streets. And also there's its own challenges spawning the connectors, the right connectors. So a main road to a minor road, that's one T connector. A minor road to a side road, that's another T connector, right? So even for each type, you have to account for every single variation. And you have to make it all fit. So that means that you won't get this type of layout that you can see here that looks a lot more natural, where roads are kind of curving here, and you can see this like divergence here. So I do like the way that the streets are generating now, but if I can help it, I don't want to restrict myself, right? So the other method would be to, instead of having the sidewalks in the roads, simply create, I'm going to call it an island in between all the intersecting roads. And that will basically mean that I have to create a mesh that would be in this shape and fill this space here, then a mesh that fills this space here, and every single mesh and every single space between roads will then be filled and basically create the sidewalk. And again, this goes around the issue with the limitation of the rows, but then it creates another issue, which is how do I generate a shape that is going to match the space here, right? And that's kind of what I've been looking at for the past week. So I've looked at many different examples online. I've looked at other projects, and most of the projects that are doing this are using the procedural mesh component, which basically means that you have to procedurally create a mesh in the engine, in editor, real time, and give it a set of vertices, triangulate the mesh, and then place it correctly. And I've never used the procedural mesh, so I've been looking at tutorials and looking at code and things like that, and it's pretty challenging, at least for me. So I've had to actually learn a lot about how meshes and how triangles are created. The order in which the vertices are fed means that the normal will be going up or down, etc. It's just a nice little challenge. So I created a few blueprints, and I wanted to show you guys here. So if we go to this other level here, I've had 3 different attempts, and this is going to be, again, mostly for fun. The first one, it's called BP Island, and it's just a little blueprint. I'm going to drop it here. And basically this island, the logic here was we will spawn one of these blueprints per road, and then the blueprint will basically create or grab a current road, and I'm going to just choose it manually here. Then you can set its location by clicking here, and notice that now the blueprint is here. BP Island is here, and then from there I'm going to move this a little bit down here, make it very easy, and then from there it'll basically try to generate a procedural mesh following the road. So if I click on generate island, you can see that I'm now generating a little island, and if I click play here, you'll see that now I have, and right now it's just a plane, but I will obviously make it a, more like a cube. But you can see that it is more or less following the shape of the road here. Here you can see obviously that there are some issues here, because at the end of the day this is more or less a polygon. But the way I'm doing this is basically creating section by section and doing a trace from the current road, in this case only to the right, getting the location and setting that as the end point. So if I look at this in wireframe mode, you can see that I'm basically creating cubes or sections, section by section, section by section, and I am determining the length of the section by determining the next road here. So that seems to work. But what happens if this road itself is curved? If I just grab this guy and I curve it and I regenerate the island, now we have a problem. You can see here, and you can see that the steps, and that's because this is the size of the segment. and you can see that I have a segment length. If I make the segment length 1,000, oops, you can see the stepping effect here because I'm basically generating the segments 1,000 units at a time. If I make this small, like 100, then you don't see the stepping effect as much. But here's the problem. Why is this having an issue? The reason is because I'm grabbing a location in this spline, I'm getting the right vector, and I'm shooting an array in the right vector's direction, hitting the road, and then getting the length. So when this road is curved towards the outside, the ray that shoots from here, that is supposed to correspond to the length here, shoots in this direction and hits the road here. And then that length is projected in this way. In other words, the original road having curves basically messes this up completely. And you can see it approximates it, but it's not good enough. Plus, the other problem with this method is that it creates a very, very dense mesh. So you can see here. Because if I again look at this in wireframe mode, to make it look decent, you see the stepping here. To make it look decent, the segment length has to be very, very small. That way, the curve can look smooth. It's almost like anti-aliasing in a way. So that is a problem, because this mesh right here is extremely dense. And right now I just have one island, and I'm just walking around, so that's not a real problem. But if I have a city with a bunch of islands and all of the islands look like that, this is going to take a huge hit on performance. So that was the initial attempt. And then there's also no easy way of detecting if the road here intersects. So if, for example, this road just happens to intersect this way, like this, and I generate the island again, you can see that we're having some issues there. Because again, I'm shooting the ray and getting a value. So this was my first attempt, and I'm gonna make this like 500 so it's not as dense. And you can see here the stepping effect. So that didn't work because again, the roads can have all kinds of curves, and this wasn't really getting me the result I wanted. It has stepping, and if the main road has a lot of curves, based on the way I'm shooting the rays, I'm not getting the correct length. So the second attempt was, well, what if I do it in a more manual way? And here's what I have. I created this little blueprint that has basically 4 corners. And what you can do is you can actually grab the handles and you can move the handles to try to match and create the space that you want. So you can see here. And then you can subdivide the space and create as many sections as you want. So this is one section, and if I eliminate construction mode, I take it off, you see that we have a put this up here. You can see that we have a island, quote-unquote island. And if I click play here, you can see that this looks more like it could be a sidewalk, right? It has collision, it has a nice shape, but the problem is, how do you handle curves? And the way you would do it is, well, let's go ahead and remove this. Say that you wanted to handle this curve. You would have to then do something like this. And maybe I could do it programmatically, right? Grab this corner, move it here, right? And try to move this guy here. And this guy could be here. But you can see now the problem that if there are curves, I would then have to do something like this, for example, and then I would have to create another section, and I would have to come here and say total segments, let's create another segment, and then I would have to say, okay, here's the active segment, and then I would then move the active segment out manually here. So you can see. So basically the active segment is in the red and the previous segment is in the other material. So that was kind of my second idea, is basically, and of course this would have to be done programmatically. I'm not saying that you would have to do this manually, but you can see here how having curves really complicates this, because you would have to then create all kinds of different segments to make sure that things are correct. Then you have to create another segment and another segment, and then you have to slide it out, for example, and so on and so forth. And I'm gonna keep doing this because I feel like I'm wasting a lot of time here, but I just want to show you guys kind of the idea here. So eventually I moved on to the third and I think the best solution, which is, instead of trying to fill the space in between roads by doing traces and like almost like by force creating segment by segment by segment, I would instead look at the roads and somehow figure out the intersection point between each road, and then use those intersection points as corners for my shape. So the worst case scenario, usually every space has 4 corners. That's usually the way it is. If another street came like this, then they would be considered 2 different spaces, right? So basically I said, is there a way that I can detect the intersection between the roads, and using that, pass this information to the procedural mesh to try to create a shape that resembles the in-between. And this is what I've been doing. And let me just show you what I have so far. So I've decided to create a separate blueprint, a sidewalk manager, and this guy basically handles the creation of the quote-unquote islands. So if I go ahead and click on calculate overlaps, every street now will do a trace and will calculate how many other roads are overlapping them. So this guy will automatically calculate and says that there are 3 roads that are overlapping, and it has the actual reference to the road and this exact location when they intersect. So this guy has 3 intercepts: this road, and this road. And the same thing for this guy will have 2, which is this and this. And basically every single road, and this guy has 3, obviously 1, 2, 3. So basically by doing this, I'm creating a network where every single road knows how many other roads intersect and where. That was the first step. The next step is now to translate these locations here, these vectors here, into coordinates. So how would I do that, right? So basically I have this guy spawn a blueprint, and let me just go ahead and click on spawn sidewalk, and you can see here what I have so far right here. And if I go to construction mode, it has like the semi-transparent sidewalk. So what you guys can see here is basically the sidewalk manager grabbed this road as the main road and looked at the overlaps, and then decided to create this sidewalk by attempting to follow the path that you guys see here. So this is getting us closer, right? So basically, how am I doing this? I'm grabbing this guy and I'm saying, well, there's an overlap here, there's an overlap here. How do I find this overlap? Well, I know that this road overlaps this road. Then I try to find a parallel road by shooting an array, grabbing this parallel road, and then asking, where does this road intercept the same road that intercepts this road here? And that way I get this location, and I grab this road and say, where in the world does this road intercept you? Then I grab this location, and that way I have now 4 intercepts. Then I spawn a blueprint, and I pass these 4 points, and those are the corners. But then I went a step further and said, well, what if I created a new point mimicking the spline points on every single road inside? And that way I can try to follow the curve of the road. So if you see here, I have a spline point here, here, and here. And this road is basically creating a spline point at the exact same location, and then doing an offset by the width of the road towards the middle. And that way you can see that we're kind of mimicking the shape. Then I do the same thing for this road. You see there's one spline point here, here, and here. And for this road, which has a spline point here, which doesn't count, here, and here. And this is the reason why you only see one spline point here. If I were to grab this guy and create another spline point here, and I delete this guy, and I go back to the sidewalk manager, calculate overlaps, and spawn the sidewalk, notice now that we have another spline point here that corresponds to this one here. And you can see that there are issues with the corners. I still have to figure out a way to move this more towards the middle. This is a corner, which obviously should be more like here, right? But we are getting to the point now where I think I am able to approximate the shape of the sidewalk. And if I just go ahead and click on play, you can see that we have now an approximation of the shape between roads. Well, not this one. This was supposed to be more like here. But you guys get the point. There you go, like that. So yeah, a little bit different video, guys. This has been really, really challenging. I think this is probably the best method to try to approximate the shape. That means that if this works out and I can polish this, that means that we can have sidewalks of irregular shapes, which allows us to keep the funky shapes for the roads that you see here. Still though, the polygons here will never be full curve. So at some point I have to decide how to handle different points here, right? So I could continue to create more and more spline points to try to approximate this. But at the end of the day, they're still rough polygons. So I don't know what the best kind of approach here is. I could simply say that these islands will approximate the roads, and if you want something exact, then you have to limit the roads curves. Or if there's maybe a hybrid approach where I could have like an island here, but also have the sidewalks on the road to try to give it the illusion of a better curve. So anyway, that's kind of what I've been working on. I'm really proud of this solution here. Getting this shape was really, really hard. I had to try a bunch of different things, but I feel like this is getting me to the right track. This allows me to be flexible with the roads, and this seems to be a good method of creating an irregular shape. So, so yeah, what do you guys think? I know I rambled a little bit on. There's a few new features that I've added. I'm not going to show in this video. That's going to be something else. But this has been a pretty big challenge that I haven't figured out how to fix yet. But hopefully I am on the right track. So if you have any opinions, what do you think? How should I handle the sidewalks? Do you care that you know, would you rather have fixed connectors even though the city is more generic, or would you rather have a more free flow city with an approximation of the sidewalks this way? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Any other ideas, if you've seen any other projects, how they handle these quote-unquote islands, I'll love to hear it. But right now, this is probably one of the bigger challenges that I am trying to solve, so we can have sidewalks in the city automatically. So yeah, let me know what you think, guys, and I'll talk to you in the next video.